holders that mounted in the ceiling, on the ceiling of a garage. And then I also decided I'd make some holders that you could also use to stand your rods in that stood on the ground. And I found a company that would cut them out for me, and so set about doing it, and then put them on Choice NZ and Trade Me, which is that new, it was the old Facebook, wasn't it, New Zealand made. And things really took off, and so leading up to Christmas, I couldn't believe it. I think we did nearly 100 orders going up to Christmas. It's tapered off a little bit now, but it's just amazing because it really helped me continue my passion of boating and fishing.
Yeah, good on you, Wade. Isn't this a wonderful story, Chris? You've got someone who turns their passion or hobby into a real venture.
Powerful story of being resilience, but also what I loved about it, Wade, I went onto your website and I love the image that you've got right at the top of the website, which is a photograph of your boat. Now, I'm familiar with Optimist sailing yachts, but your boat has on the side Optimistic, which I thought was just a fantastic sort of picture of what you've done and how you've approached this whole thing. Well done.
Yeah, thank you. That was a name that my brother-in-law gave me because I built that boat about 6 years ago as a project, and I said to him, what am I going to call it? And he said, Wade, you're the most optimistic guy I've ever met. So he said, I think we should call it Optimistic.
We've got to sneak in your details. So the name of the brand is what? 37 South Rods. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So all you need to do is do a bit of a Google on that, and you'll come up to the website. And just finally, do you miss? I mean, the airline industry has gone through such change. Do you miss it? Do you miss any aspect of it?
Yes, I do. You know, we live in Papakura in Auckland, which is very close to Ardmore, and I see the airplanes flying across, but certainly miss the camaraderie. We had a wonderful bunch of people, and we'd go away for 4 or 5 days at a time, and so I miss that. I do miss the flying, but I was so fortunate enough to have had 42 years in it that to end it suddenly like that was not such a wrench. I haven't flown since, but I was lucky enough to have, had a wonderful career.
Good on you, Wade, and I appreciate you being with us on the panel. Thank you.
No worries, thank you.
That is Wade Rowe there, so you can collect get one of his rod holders. Again, 37 South Rods. Cool story, Alexia.
It is cool, and it's actually cool to see how that Made in New Zealand Facebook page has taken off. That post-COVID, everybody wants to buy Kiwi Made, which is great.
Yeah. Couple of emails here. My bike was an awesome bottle green lowline, and my little brothers had a dragster and a chopper, banana seats at all. And another one, my dad let me choose between my sister's Rally 20 and my brother's chopper. Thank you for that. And Alexia Russell from the potentially award-winning podcast, The Detail. It's going to be great this year, I reckon. And Chris Clark, thank you very much for your time. I'm back tomorrow, Tuesday. See you then.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei, it'll be another 48 hours before we know if more COVID restrictions are coming. The latest community case is the highly contagious South African strain, and it was caught in MIQ. Northlanders describe chaos at a testing station, people abandoning queues and wait times of 7 hours plus. We talked to the Director General of Health and a returnee in MIQ at the hotel where the Northland woman became infected. There's rumblings in Rotorua and warnings of more to come. A new on-the-job teacher training pilot takes off. Slim pickings for Central Otago fruit growers. And some good news after 74 days missing. A man's best friend finds her way home.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Kia ora, ko Susana Leata tēnei. Health authorities are scouring CCTV footage to determine how COVID-19 was passed between two returnees in managed isolation. A woman in Northland has contracted COVID-19 after testing negative twice during her stay at the Pullman Hotel. She's confirmed with the more infectious South African strain, which is an exact match to another returnee who was on the same floor as her. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says they're still working out when the pair crossed paths and how the virus has been transmitted.
My understanding is the Pullman only has CCTV in the common areas rather than on corridors per se. So the CCTV footage may not tell us anything in itself, but of course interviews with the two people are important, interviews with staff, as well as the other work we're going to do looking at whether there were potential common surfaces.
And you can hear the full interview with Dr Bloomfield on Checkpoint shortly. A Northland man says he's waited 7 hours for a COVID test today and started handing out water himself because so many people were baking in their cars. Mike Paura at the Pohe Island Centre in Whangarei says at least a dozen people who were in line have up and left without a test because it's taking so long. His partner brought him some big bottles of water and paper cups to hand out. Only after this, about 3:30 this afternoon, he said the District Health Board also did the same. The number of coronavirus cases in the US has now topped 25 million. Here's the BBC's Nomia Iqbal in Washington.
These figures that we're now seeing, what's even more staggering is that health experts think that they could be understated figures given how much they believe that the coronavirus has spread across the country. Joe Biden has already taken action, around about 10 executive orders on the first day of getting into office to deal with the pandemic. But there is way more to go with this, and he is trying to push through Congress a package worth more than $1 trillion, which will, amongst many things, accelerate the rate at which people will be vaccinated.
Nomia Iqbal in Washington with that report. 5 houses have been evacuated in Pines Beach, north of Christchurch, as firefighters battle a large scrub fire they were alerted to just after 3 this afternoon. 3 helicopters and 18 fire crews are fighting the fire front, which is up to 250 metres long and has so far destroyed 2 sheds. Meanwhile, another fire at Balmoral Hill on Christchurch's Port Hills, which also threatened homes, is now under control. Nearby resident John Reynolds says when he first set eyes on it, the Port Hills fire front was only about 20 metres across and nothing to worry about. But that all changed within the space of just 10 minutes.
I turned round to see, and the fire very, very quickly moved up the hill, extremely quickly, and it was in front of my neighbour's house. So that's when I sort of take a bit of a closer look. And by then the firemen were here, but it was just galloping up the hill.
Port Hills resident John Reynolds. Opposition parties are united in calling for the government to urgently fix the law so companies caught dumping contaminated wastewater down the drain can be fined. It's after RNZ revealed hundreds of companies have breached their trade waste consents, often multiple times in the past year, without penalty. Anusha Bradley reports.
Council's pleas to government to fix a loophole in the law so they can fine companies for consent breaches have fallen on deaf ears for nearly 2 decades. The local government minister, Nanai Mahuta, says the new water regulator will look at the issue, but it won't happen for at least 2 years. The National, Green and ACT parties all say they support a law change so companies are held to account. Forest and Bird and Greenpeace are also calling for change, saying it's shocking so many big household names are not walking the green talk. Ko Anusha Bradley aho.
It's 4 minutes past 5. Canterbury have handed defending champions Wellington just their second defeat of the domestic women's 2020 cricket competition. An unbeaten 71 from 50 balls from White Ferns vice-captain Amy Satterthwaite has guided the Magicians to a 9-wicket win at the Basin Reserve. The win makes Canterbury join Wellington in securing a spot in the top 3 finals series. Meanwhile, the Canterbury men's team have posted 153 for 7, batting first in their match against Wellington. The Manchester United football team's run of success continues. United have knocked defending English Premier League champions Liverpool out of the FA Cup with a 3-2 win. Since going out of the Champions League in early December, league leaders United have been beaten only once, and manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer says the team is in a good place.
Fantastic to win games against obviously last year's champions, a fantastic team, and we've had good results over the last couple of years. playing different systems. But this time, we play on our terms as well. We've found a way that we believe in, the players believe in, and we're getting stronger and stronger.
Ole Gunnar Solskjaer. Tom Brady is returning to American football's Super Bowl for the 10th time. The star quarterback has helped the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to a 31-26 win over the Green Bay Packers in today's NFC Championship game. Tampa Bay will play defending champs Kansas City in the Super Bowl after the Chiefs beat the Buffalo Bills 38-24 in the AFC Championship game. That's the news.
COVID-19 is back in the community.
We are working on the assumption that this is a positive case and that it is a more transmissible variant.
We know that the virus has changed. The risk level has gone up considerably.
Absolutely devastated. We don't know what to do.
We've got many anxious Northlanders today.
I think I'd like to see a return to legal language checkpoints, and that must be able to be worked out.
Catch Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Corrindan weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for the whole of the North Island, fine and warm. However, cloudy morning and night in the west from Northland to Wellington with patchy light drizzle. Nelson and Buller, fine weather, a few areas of cloud morning and night. For Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly sunny, hot, especially tomorrow. Westland, cloudy periods today and remaining showers clearing tonight, mainly fine tomorrow. Fiordland, cloudy with periods of drizzle. Otago and Southland, today cloudy in Southland with occasional light rain about Stewart Island, otherwise fine. Tomorrow fine and warm with high cloud. Chatham Islands mainly fine, high cloud at times. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora and welcome to the first checkpoint of 2021. You may be feeling a slight sense of deja vu. It'll be another 48 hours before we'll know if more COVID restrictions are coming. This afternoon, health officials confirmed the new community case of COVID-19 is the more infectious South African variant of the virus. The 56-year-old woman is the first community case of COVID since November. And the COVID-19 response minister, Chris Hipkins, says she caught the virus from another person in MIQ at the Pullman Hotel in Auckland.
The two people occupied rooms in close proximity to each other on the same floor of the Pullman Hotel, and I'm advised by officials that they are confident that the infection was a direct one and that there is no other missing link in between those two people. We don't know exactly how the infection took place at this point, and investigations on that are continuing. That includes looking at CCTV footage from the Pullman Hotel to identify when and where they may have come into contact with one another.
Soon we'll have Dr Ashley Bloomfield on what the next steps are in the response to this case. But first, some people in Northland waited more than 7 hours to get their COVID tests today and described the process as chaos. Thousands of people turned up to testing stations across the region, with additional stations added in Helensville and Mangawhai to keep up with demand. As one Whangarei testing station reached capacity, staff sent people to another swabbing centre across town, only for them to sit in their cars for hours with no word on when they would be seen. Now that's prompted calls for better communication and resourcing for the north, where tensions are running high. Our reporter Nita Blake-Person and cameraman Nick Munro are in Whangarei and filed this report.
The call to get tested was heard loud and clear in Whangarei. Cars snaked down this main road and filled the car park as those inside faced a nervous wait for their swab.
I would have thought that it would have been more organised. I knew there was going to be a wait, but I thought it would be more organised. There would be more people on, sort of here to help. But it's just chaos. Maybe 750 and 900 people, I'd say.
Whangarei woman Janine was one of the first to arrive this morning. She isn't allowed back at work until she gets a negative result.
I've been to the same place, but I also have a colleague that's been to another place as well, and I've had contact with her. Somebody needs to be down here telling people what's happening, and there needs to be something done, because if I'm here till 4 or 6 o'clock tonight and my tests don't get done till tomorrow, then I've got not back to work till Thursday. I mean, they knew yesterday this was happening. They put it on the news at 4 o'clock, so they've had at least 2 or 3 hours to get something sorted, surely. It's happened before. It's not as if it's something new.
It's 26 degrees here in Whangarei, and the hundreds of people who are lined up in cars or waiting in the car park have been baking in there for hours. They're frustrated that up until recently there haven't been portaloos, they've got no access to water, with many people leaving this line out of frustration around when they're actually going to get tested. Lindsay Dunn is among those to have waited in the heat, but he's seen plenty of others who haven't.
My simple view is that, people leave and then they're asked again to do this, they just won't. Because, again, I get it, it's a difficult time, but cripes, this isn't new for the DHB, so they should, I think, should be better geared up than this.
This wasn't his first port of call for a test today, as stations across the region filled up.
Went to Cumall first, and then just got to the start of the Winga Crescent, and they sent me here. They said, no, they were full to capacity, so come down here. So, yeah, I came here.
There were around 4 medical staff testing and collecting details from those lined up here. Checkpoint was told by people waiting that at one point there was only one nurse for the hundreds waiting to be tested.
Well, poor buggers are caught with their pants down, haven't they?
What makes you say that?
Well, they haven't got enough people, but that's not their fault. That's just how it is, and we just have to accept it.
Contact tracing on the Northland community case has identified 15 people as close contacts. Everyone lined up here had a connection of some sort.
Her sister's auntie was in the same shop 2 hours after the case last week, so we're unsure. We just come down to be, safe, because this one's got low white body cell count, so safer than sorry.
She woke up this morning with a sore throat. Whole house has actually got a sore throat. Partner works in Ruakaka, which is basically where it started. She's not doing too well, as you can see. She's got no clothes on at the moment. Yeah, she just need to get tested. We're immune compromised, been here since 8:30, so it's now nearly 1 o'clock. I've been crying most of the morning because I just want to get it over with.
Very, very boring.
How long have you been waiting for?
I don't know, but very long. Maybe 3 hours? I don't know, but way more than 3 hours probably.
Northland DHB was not available for an interview tonight. In a statement, it said community testing had been expanded in response to public demand. An additional centre was set up in Helensville, in Tamaki Makaurau and in Mangawhai. But that may be too little too late for those who couldn't stick around today, as others face an anxious wait for those test results to be returned. In Whangarei, Cornita Blakeperson, aho.
And if you were listening to that, we'll put the video for that story up on our Facebook page. There was a 4-day crossover in managed isolation between a returnee with the more infectious South African strain of COVID and the Northland woman they passed the virus to. Genome testing indicates it was a direct transmission, but exactly how the virus spread between the two is a mystery right now. The carrier returned a positive day 3 test, but Dr Ashley Bloomfield says that person was free to move around the Pullman hotel before they got the result.
They don't have to stay in their room while awaiting a day 3 test, but of course their movements are very, very carefully and strictly regulated, and that includes only being taken out for exercise breaks and so on, with strict infection prevention protocols.
Where would that have day 3 test, where would it have taken place? In their room or somewhere else?
Yes, in their room. So the nurses go along and when they do their daily check-ins with people and or if they're doing a swab, then it happens essentially at the door of the room.
So there's only basically 4 days where these two people were in the Pullman MIQ together, right?
Yes.
So when that person was moved to Jet Park, that is the day the Northland woman leaves the facility. Was there any contact that you're aware of during that transfer process, the person leaving for Jet Park and this woman checking out as such?
Look, there's nothing to suggest at the moment that they had direct contact. It's possible. We do know that our Northland case only left her room ready to do the exercise each day, some physical activity. She was very strict on sort of infection prevention control, wearing a mask when she was outside her room, which everybody has to do. So it could have been direct contact between the two, even fleetingly, and that's what we're looking at. Or it could have been a common surface that they touched, so-called fomite transmission, or some sort of aerosolization in the air and potentially even through the ventilation system. So all of those are things we will be looking at.
Are you seriously considering the ventilation system? Because I'm wondering if that was a possibility for infection, wouldn't you have had other cases like this transmitted in this way?
Yes, exactly. We would have expected that, and we haven't. But of course, it's a matter of looking at every single potential route of transmission. And so we can do a review of the ventilation system there at Pullman. We're in the process of doing that anyway for all the facilities. Again, this is just part of continually strengthening our response.
But would you accept that that is an unlikely route of infection?
It's unlikely but possible, and so we need to rule it out.
How far through the CCTV are you at this point? And does the Pullman have CCTV everywhere you need to see?
My understanding is the Pullman only has CCTV in the common areas rather than on corridors per se. So the CCTV footage may not tell us anything in itself, but of course interviews with the two people are important, interviews with staff, as well as the other work we're going to do looking at whether there were potential common surfaces.
Are we getting to the point where people should just have to stay in their room the entire time of managed isolation like they do in Australia?
Look, it's something that people raise from time to time. We think that the risk of allowing people out for specific purposes, it's not like people have free run on coming and going as they like, with very good controls and strictly supervised, and I have observed this myself, just how this happens in a facility. It's very, very rigorously overseen. So we think that those risks can be managed at this point. We don't think there's a need to confine people to their rooms for the whole period. We have introduced that for that first test, the day 01 test, and people won't be allowed out of their rooms until that has returned negative.
So when you look at this, with the information that you've got, do you think it indicates an unforeseen hole in your protocols, a systems failure, or do you think it's some kind of fluke or rogue event that this woman has become infected?
Look, whatever one of the above it is, and I don't think it's by any means a systems failure. I think 102,000 people have now been through managed isolation, and we've got a really good track record of keeping them safe. So whatever it is, we will be looking meticulously at whether there is a gap and how we can close any gap if there is one, and keep strengthening our protocols, in particular around those last few days when people are there. Whether there's anything we need to do to prevent people who are clearly not infected with COVID from potentially being infected by others.
Given you are yet to work out exactly how this happened, is it time to go into some kind of lockdown, even if localised in Northland?
No, not at this point in time. There's nothing to suggest that there is any onward transmission at this point in Northland. And having identified...
But you're still waiting on tests though, aren't you, Dr Bloomfield? You asked all of these people to go in and have tests. You haven't got the results back. So we're kind of in that period of time where we don't know either way. So why not exercise extreme caution and lock down Northland just for 48 hours until you work it all out?
Look, I think we're already... exercising much more caution than we have in the past, in the sense we're asking everybody who was at any of those 30 venues at the same time to get tested, and many of them will have had no obvious contact with the person. The second thing is we know from the results of the testing of the Northland cases, two closest contacts, one her partner she spent a lot of time with over that period of time, he's returned a negative test. And so that's, reassuring.
But they're not through the full incubation period, are they? So will they be retested, the hairdresser and the partner?
The medical officer of health will determine that. The normal protocol is that they spend the full 14-day period from when they were first exposed through to when the end of that 14-day period is, with testing twice during that period. The
point there is they're not out of the woods completely yet. While you say that is a promising sign, it's not a definitive result as such.
Oh, look, it's a very promising, given when these people were exposed in the first instance and the amount of time that they spent with the person, the fact they've returned negative results now is really very reassuring.
So you don't think there's any need to lock down or place any restrictions on travel at the moment? Because the other thing is, there's a lot of people, it's summer, a lot of people travelling, there'll be Aucklanders up there, people from other parts of the country. Should they stay put until they find out what the deal is here, or should they return to their home cities?
Look, the people who we think may be at some risk, even if it's small, are the people who were at the same venues our case was at the same time, and other people we're asking to be tested. At this point in time, we don't think there's any indication for us to restrict movement.
So in terms of that testing, obviously you've stood up extra testing facilities. As you'll be aware, there are some people who have been queuing for hours, and our reporters on the ground say some people are just turning tail and leaving without being tested because the wait has been too long. Is that good enough?
Look, I just want to reiterate the point we made in the stand-up today, and that is the priority for testing is anyone who's symptomatic and the people who were at one of the 30 venues at the same time as the case. Other people who are not symptomatic, who may just be concerned, don't need to be tested at the moment. For those who are waiting to be tested, thank you for your patience, and you can imagine the teams are working as fast as they can, and there is there are a number of facilities that have been stood up today to try and get everybody who needs to be tested quickly.
So are there people in those queues that don't need to be in the queues to get tested? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, certainly there was a report from Northland today that there were people there who weren't symptomatic or who weren't at the venues, and they're not people who need a test today.
What can you tell us about how this woman is at the moment? I mean, how did she take the news that she has this South African variant of the virus?
Look, my understanding, and I asked this question specifically this morning, is that she's doing well and she's in good spirits. And, again, I think, as we've said, we can all be extremely grateful for the actions she has taken because it's going to help us protect the community.
And on that note, you haven't had any news of more positive tests?
Not at this point, and of course we would be telling everybody as soon as possible if we did.
And that, of course, is the very familiar voice of Dr Ashley Bloomfield. We are keen for your feedback. Were you in a queue waiting to get tested today? How long did you wait? Did you wait until you got the test, or did you give up and go home? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And later in the program, we'll hear from a recent returnee who is staying at the Pullman Hotel, which is where this latest community case picked up COVID-19. Now, a quick traffic update. There is a car fire on State Highway 29 in the Kaimai Ranges. Stop-go traffic management is in place on the western side of the Kaimai Range. Emergency services are on site, and the transport agency Waka Kotahi is asking people to follow their directions and expect delays. To other news now, and as students get ready to head back to the classroom, some teachers in training will be part of a pilot program this year to learn on the job. Instead of going through the usual route to get their teaching qualification, they'll spend a year immersed in the classroom with their study costs covered. Louise Tanuth explains.
Schools back for children across the country in the next week or so. And this year at 12 schools in Auckland, 24 teachers in training will be joining them for a year in the classroom. It's a pilot program aimed at giving teachers on-the-job training from day one. It's an immersive program which will see the students study papers through the University of Waikato at the same time as their practical learning at Auckland's secondary schools. The focus is on hands-on experience. Schools cover the costs of the study and provide an allowance of around $10,000 for the student. Stacey Hughes is part of the pilot and will be stationed at Sacred Heart College for her training. She says the opportunity to complete a diploma on school grounds instead of in lecture halls sold it for her.
The more time that you can spend in front of students and learning from them is going to make you a better teacher. To have a program with an opportunity of being in front of students full time just made perfect sense to me.
Students will be completing papers online while also working at their chosen schools, which ramps up the workload. Miss Hughes says there'll be a lot on her plate, but she's ready for the challenge.
It was definitely something that I figured out pretty fast that they were serious, that it was going to be a full working load. They were asking a lot about our characteristics and our habits and things to make sure that they were picking people that would be able to handle that load. And I believe my organisational skills will get me through, so I should be good.
Westlake Boys High School on Auckland's North Shore has taken on 3 students to train on the job. They'll be working in different departments such as Te Reo Māori, Performing Arts, English, Media and Social Sciences. Principal David Ferguson says a year of training will help the students slot into their first teaching job straight away.
We're just hoping that by putting some time and effort and resource into supporting them with the initial training, it's going to mean that they're hopefully more likely to hit the ground running when they start at the beginning of 2022.
He says it's an investment for both parties.
We probably have about 155 teachers at the moment, so we're always going to get some turnover. We normally have a few vacancies at the end of the year, so that's why we are positive and hopeful that we're going to be able to offer them something.
If someone's already got a qualification, they'd normally have to do a year's study, including a 3-month work placement in schools. Mr Ferguson says the pilot will prioritise the in-classroom training.
From our point of view, it means we hopefully can spend a bit more time with them and supporting them with their training. They'll get the chance to see more teachers at the top of their game teaching than that potentially they would if they were only here for a 4-week practicum.
The 12 schools have linked up with the University of Waikato to provide the qualification part of the program. Pro-Vice-Chancellor of Education, Professor Don Klinger, says he hopes the program will encourage other people into teaching.
Past several years, there's been a real shortage of teacher educators in secondary subject areas, especially in areas like math, chemistry, physics. This is an opportunity to enhance our ability to attract people to this fantastic profession.
He says if the pilot program in Auckland is successful, it could expand to other regions, with places like Tokoroa already keen to be involved. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Louise Tenuth aho.
Pressure is piling on the government to urgently fix a law so companies caught dumping contaminated wastewater down the drain can be fined. It comes after RNZ revealed hundreds of companies have breached their trade waste consents, often multiple times in the past year without penalty. Councils have been pleading with successive governments for the last 18 years to fix a loophole in the law to allow them to issue fines without success. Here's investigative journalist Anusha Bradley with the story.
Councils can prosecute companies for breaches in court, but in reality it's never done because it's too costly. The Local Government Act gave them the power to issue fines, but a drafting error in the law meant the regulations allowing it couldn't be written. Forest and Bird spokesperson Tom Kay says fixing the Act must be a top priority for the government so companies that breach consents are held to account.
And it's a really simple fix. The Minister needs to make it a priority to address that as soon as possible and within this term of government. And we understand that there's a draft bill out there that could be picked up and progressed really rapidly to plug that hole in the Local Government Act. To be honest, it's insane that this has just been pushed off the agenda for several decades.
Greenpeace spokesperson Jessica Desmond is concerned by the number of big brands with multiple consent breaches.
A lot of them are very well-known New Zealand companies. A lot of them spend a lot of time and money telling the public how sustainable they are. And to me, actions really speak louder than words. And when you have something like, 700 breaches of a consent, that is a real pattern of behaviour that indicates actually that the environment is not something that's being prioritised.
National's local government spokesperson Christopher Luxon agrees a law change is needed.
If you're a company in the 2020s, for goodness sake, anywhere operating in New Zealand or anywhere around the world, and you haven't got an integrated view of how you fit into a broader community and the environmental, societal, community impacts that you have, then you're living in the dark ages. And so, yes, there'll be some recalcitrance, and we've got to make sure we've got a system in place that actually, if you're not going to respect our laws and our rules, then we enforce them.
The Greens' Three Waters spokesperson, Eugenie Sage, says she'll lobby her Labour colleagues for change, but she also wants more incentives for companies to reduce the amount of waste they're producing in the first place.
Iceland uses every single part of fish. The fish skins can go to handbags, the bones and things for collagen. There's certainly exciting work happening in this field, but I think some more research and science and more encouragement in this space would really help.
ACT also agrees councils should be able to issue spot fines for consent breaches. Its local government and environment spokesperson Simon Court says private funders should be allowed to help pay for the massive upgrades to wastewater infrastructure that's needed so councils can cope with the amounts of industrial waste being discharged.
The public sector cannot afford to fund the infrastructure development in the timeframes that communities expect. And that could be funds like the New Zealand Super Fund or ACC who have signalled an interest in investing in New Zealand infrastructure.
Local Government Minister Nanai Mahuta wasn't available for an interview, but in a statement agrees there's a lack of regulation and investment in wastewater infrastructure. She says the new water service regulator, Taumata Arawai, will be looking at ways wastewater treatment is regulated. That new body will not tackle wastewater for at least the next 2 years. For Checkpoint, ko Anusha Bradley Aho.
Well, a lot of you have a lot to say on this latest community case of COVID, and a number of you have been trying to get tested today. This person says spent over 6 hours in the car, hot, next to go, but they closed testing. Oops. Very poor organisation, unfair traffic control, this listener says. Someone else says they waited 4.5 hours at the Mangawhai domain, that they were advised or required to get a test as they were working when the lady who tested positive came into their workplace. And they say frustrating to hear that many people there did not need to get tested today. Someone else says, took me just over 8 hours to get tested in Whangarei. Lovely staff doing their best, but so under-resourced. On the general issue of another community case, this listener says Harold has got in touch to say, lazy, complacent Kiwis got what they deserve. I saw few scan QR codes or sign in, few still wear masks and don't seem to care. Bring it on, COVID-19, says Harold. Someone else says, anyone asking why thousands of people with no symptoms turn up for testing, what on earth do these people think will happen when suddenly they all go at the same time? Of course there will be a lengthy wait. Well, we're wondering why maybe they don't have someone that walks down the row and just sort of asks people and then moves on the ones that don't need to be there. There may actually be someone doing that on site. Let us know if you saw that. Text us on 2101. And Anthony says it seems profoundly sensible, even to a child, to require the 14-day isolation and testing regime to happen at country of source prior to departure for New Zealand. This has the benefits of it being less likely of importing cases and the burden of the costs being carried by a country of origin. Now, coming up on the program, we speak to a recent returnee who's in managed isolation at the Pullman Hotel, where the latest community case caught COVID. The miners pulled to safety in China after 14 days underground, and a man's best friend missing for 74 days. Now Doug's got his canine back. We would love to hear from you. Send us your feedback. Don't forget you can text us on 2101. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Susanna.
Health authorities are scouring CCTV footage to determine how COVID-19 was passed between two returnees in managed isolation. A woman in Northland has contracted COVID-19 after testing negative twice during her stay at the Pullman Hotel. She's confirmed to have the more infectious South African strain, which is an exact match to another returnee who was on the same floor. Dr Ashley Bloomfield says they're still working out how the pair crossed paths and the virus was transmitted. And Dr Bloomfield has told Checkpoint there's no indication at this stage that anyone's movement in Northland should be restricted. He's reminding people that the priority for testing is given to people who are symptomatic. Dr Bloomfield says anyone not displaying symptoms does not need to be tested. 5 houses have been evacuated in Pines Beach north of Christchurch as firefighters battle a large scrub fire. 3 helicopters and 18 fire crews are fighting the fire front, which is up to 250 metres long and has so far destroyed 2 sheds. Meanwhile, another fire at Balmoral Hill on Christchurch's Port Hills, which also threatened homes, is now under control. Smaller earthquakes may continue in the Bay of Plenty for weeks. This morning the bay was jolted by a series of 7 earthquakes in the space of 20 minutes. Volcanologist Brad Scott from GeoNet says they were slightly larger than normal, and he describes them as a swarm rather than a typical sequence which has its largest first and then tails off. South Central Otago, or some Central Otago orchards, are being hit by the double whammy of fewer workers and the crop damage from a devastating New Year deluge. The government has granted a border exemption for 2,000 RSE workers to help with harvest around the country, but growers say more are needed. Fresh Max Orchard Central Otago Operations Manager Nigel Hope says some orchardists are walking away from this year's crop. Those are the latest news headlines on RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. Kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. It's time to get to the business news now with Nona Peltier. Nona, the super fund, you tell me, has just released its 5-year investment strategy. Now, this is for passive investments. So, whoa, break it down for us. What did it
find?
So
passive investments different from active investments. Active investments are the kind that the super fund will, actively invest in. It could be a housing project, a light rail investment. It could be any number of larger investment types of things, and there is no real limit to what the super fund will invest in. They've got $54 billion of funds under management, and those are the funds that we'll be drawing on in some years from now when we retire. So they have a very long investment horizon, and every 5 years they review their passive investments, and these are the ones that typically sit in indexed funds. So if you want to invest in the top 50 companies in New Zealand or the top 500 in the United States, that type of thing. And so they decided after a long time of discussing that they were going to just leave things alone and not make any changes. So I guess they thought that their investment strategy that they had in the 5 years before was pretty good, and they're going to stick with it over the next 5 years. And that's not to say it's set in stone. So what they're planning is 80% of those funds in global equities, including 5% in New Zealand equities being shares in our companies, and the balance in bonds. And so overall, the investment strategy isn't, again, set in stone. So if some great opportunities arise, the super fund are willing and able to move some of those monies around. But overall, they're expecting that the passive investments that they've got there will return to their shareholders 6.8% over the next 5 years. And those funds are, of course, shareholders, you and me, and the rest of New Zealand.
Okay, well, on a smaller scale of investment, perhaps, latest research suggests small and medium-sized businesses are going to be investing more on technology.
Yeah, interesting. So COVID has brought up quite a number of issues for small companies and retailers and so forth with the digitization of their business. So people had to accommodate staff working from home, for example, customers not being able to physically access their premises, so online trading and so forth. And what's happened was that typically small businesses will deal with resellers of technology. So let's say you have an Apple computer. You don't go to Apple to buy it. You go down to the retail store and you buy it from them. And then maybe it's your mate or someone you know who will come along and help you set it up. Well, that wasn't possible during the lockdowns. And what these companies found was they had no one to provide any support. So that sort of looked, what can we do? So that, of course, entrepreneurs have created a lot of opportunities for small businesses to get those types of services online. But to attract that kind of support, you're going to have cash flow, and which is going to be really interesting for businesses these days to generate, because it's less about buying laptops and more about getting that support you need when you need it and 24/7. And so that's an interesting bit of change in the way that people are planning their spend in technology. So the story about cash being king, it certainly will be in the future and right now.
So what has been going on the markets today, Nona?
Yeah, it's been kind of a quiet start to the week. We've got Wellington Anniversary Day, of course. And also Australia Day is tomorrow. So a lot of Australians took a long weekend, and that meant the market was a little bit quiet. Nevertheless, though, we started on a strong note. We closed up 66 points today, and that's 0.5% higher at 13,399. Now, the dollar is also a little bit stronger, and that's interesting because there's a lot going on in the world, as with the new administration in the U.S., for example. So our dollar is trading at 72 cents U.S., 93.2 Australian, and 52.6 pence. That's British pence. We can expect to see some movement in the dollar over the rest of the week, with some movements in the U.S. regarding how they're going to take care of their economy and what that's going to mean overall. So yeah, lots of interesting things coming up this week.
Thanks, Nona. Nona Peltier with our business update. A returnee in MIQ at the Pullman Hotel believes the system is robust and well policed, with guests restricted to their rooms and unless they're sporting a wristband, signalling that they've tested negative for COVID. The latest community case is a Northland woman who left managed isolation at the same Auckland hotel after testing negative, but subsequently became ill and is confirmed to have the South African strain of COVID. Genome testing indicates she caught it from another guest at the MIQ hotel, but health officials don't know exactly how. Tenani French flew home from the US last Monday, was bussed to the Pullman with people from his flight, masked up and separated from the driver by a plastic divider. The day zero tests were introduced. Now, he describes how the process worked.
So we were all socially distanced in the line. Everyone had to wear the masks that were provided to us. We got given a barcode to track the test results. And then, we went through that testing situation. Once we actually got the test, we were sent back to our rooms and we weren't allowed to leave under any circumstances until the test results had come back, which was about 24 hours later. When we did get the test results texted to us, we still had to remain in the room until we got a wristband. So a nurse would go around to everyone who had got a negative test. They'd do a temperature check at the room, and then they'd give us a wristband, which would let us leave the room to go to the exercise area.
So the wristband shows that you had a negative test. I'm wondering how carefully was that policed, the wearing of the wristband?
Pretty carefully. Once I actually forgot to put my wristband off before I left my room. And before I even got to the elevator, a staff member basically yelled at me to go back to my room and put it on. So they're pretty onto it. And I haven't seen anybody else walking around who doesn't have one.
So how compliant do you think guests are being from what you've seen?
From what I've seen, pretty compliant. I haven't seen a single person lower their mask at all or take it off. And everyone's been very cognizant about social distancing. It's as if we actually have a bubble around us. People are like walking around other people. There's not a lot of times where we're close enough to anyone for it to be an issue. I think the main congestion point is the elevator lobby. And they've got a staff member there who's watching it. There's stickers on the ground above where you're supposed to stand. You've got to sanitize before and after using the elevator. So they're pretty onto it. I would say compliance is very high.
When you say you've got to sanitize before and after you use the lift, so they get you what? To wipe your hands, but does anyone wipe the buttons or the interior of the lift?
Not after each guest. So they've got a sanitizing station on each floor. So you have to sanitize before you press the button, and then again when you get to the ground floor after you get out of the lift.
And just to be clear, when you arrived at the hotel and you say they checked everyone in one bubble at a time, when you went to check in, was there anyone else around you, like people departing the hotel? Anyone? Who could you see?
No, so everyone had come in from the same bus as us. They actually, what we've noticed is they'll post the hours for the lobby and for the exercise area in each of the floor's elevator bays. So, and they'll close it. They'll close both of those areas if there's a new busload of people coming in. So we can't go to the lobby or to the exercise area when there's new people being checked in. So they keep it quite separate. The new arrivals are very separate from us.
What about people leaving? Have you seen any congestion when people are leaving? Do people leave through the same door and reception area as people arrive?
I'm not sure. I haven't seen anybody leaving. The time that they gave us to leave next week was quite early in the morning, which is actually before the exercise area opens. So I'm not sure if that's intentional to try and keep the two groups separate, but yeah, that's all I know about that.
Do you still get to leave on time after what's happened?
They haven't told us anything different. So yeah, our exit plan is still the 14 days.
Assuming that you test negative all the way through. So how did you find out about this community case and its connection to the Pullman?
Just from watching the news, basically. We haven't heard anything from the facility itself about it. It's all just been from the media.
So, given what you've seen there and what you've heard, do you have any idea how this woman may have picked up a COVID infection from another guest? Are there any points where you think, oh, that's not quite right, or it could be better?
For the most part, it feels very safe and very well run. I will say it does make sense to perhaps require people to isolate between their final test and leaving. I think that makes a lot of sense, because there are times where you just happen to pass someone in the hallway or outside in the recreation area. So that would probably be the only thing that I would think needs to be addressed and probably should be addressed. And I actually plan to do that myself, whether or not it's the rule.
I noticed today they say they can't rule out at this stage that it's not been passed through the ventilation system, so the air conditioning. Does that worry you at all?
Yes, it does. So we've had the windows open the whole time, trying to get some circulation through and some fresh air. So it's good that we do have opening windows, but it is definitely a concern.
And that is Tenani French, who has been in MIQ at the Pullman Hotel since last Monday. And that, of course, is the hotel where the woman who is the latest community case picked up the virus. Some central Otago orchards are describing this season's crop as a write-off, while others struggle to find enough workers. It's been a tough season for the growers, with COVID-19 border restrictions cutting the crucial supply of overseas workers. To make matters worse, a deluge hit during the peak cherry harvest. Our Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton spoke to growers.
Ettrick Gardens co-owner John Preedy has been growing fruit, berries and vegetables in the small central Otago town of Ettrick for decades. He says they scraped through the busy berry picking period, but now they're entering crunch time as students head home. He's now worried there will be no one around to harvest apples and other autumnal fruit.
The loss of the backpackers and not having my summer REC workers here, that's really where we're going to feel it, because normally the backpackers finish as cherries and then they're looking for things to do before the main apples start. And we can fill a few gaps there and it works out quite well, but not now.
The government's granted a border exemption for 2,000 RSE workers from the Pacific to assist with harvests across the country, with some already arriving and starting isolation. John Preedy needs about 8 more workers, but says the exemption is no help to him.
And I think the government's, I don't know, they're just not interested in listening. I'm not sure why. I don't know what the hell's wrong with them, but the RSE thing, my business is a small family business and we can't afford to spend $8,000 a head to bring RSE workers in. It's just too much for us.
Fresh Max Orchard's Central Otago Operations Manager, Nigel Hope, says they'd usually harvest 60 to 80 tonnes of cherries and 500 tonnes of stone fruit a season, with up to 80 people on deck to pick and pack. But that was turned upside down by the New Year flooding.
We lost 40% of it, really, 40% of our cherries. So that's meant that labour isn't an issue as such, but quality is. We've sort of been affected in the export market with poor quality, and then that's affected the price as well, and obviously less tonnages coming off the trees.
Nigel Hope says it's been a difficult season.
Some people have walked away from their crops. Some people are just struggling through, carrying on, trying to get the best that they can out of it, and basically looking forward to the next season, 2022, because this one's pretty much a write-off, really.
Webb's Fruit grows apples, pears and summer fruit near Cromwell and still has roughly 80% of the harvest left to go. Its owner Simon Webb says his orchard is looking really positive, but he knows others are doing it tough.
It's hard, you do all that work for 11 months of the year, and if you've only got a month to get the fruit off and it goes wrong, times aren't fun.
Central Otago District Mayor Tim Cadogan recently visited growers around the Teviot Valley and says their orchards are looking promising, but they're facing worker shortages, particularly for the upcoming apple harvest as students return to their study. And apple picking isn't for the faint-hearted.
The average apple picker, I'm told, climbs 25 vertical kilometres up and down the ladders in the course of the season. So it's really tough. And then going from there into winter, which is when the pruning happens, and pruning is highly skilled. If you get that pruning wrong, you find out the effects come harvest time. So it is skilled, and they're really, really worried about getting the workers in to do that.
Tim Cadogan says there's a straightforward solution: allow more RSE workers in and let them stay longer. A spokesperson for Immigration Minister Chris Farfoy says there's no current plans to increase the intake of RSE workers beyond 2,000, but the minister is monitoring the situation and staying in touch with the industry. While many growers are stoically counting their losses, searching for staff or busy picking, they're hopeful for a more fruitful season in 2022. For Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton, TNA.
Well, a quick traffic update. A crash is blocking lane 2 eastbound on Auckland's northwestern motorway near the Newton Road off-ramp. Waka Kotahi is urging motorists to pass the scene with care and expect some delays as police work to clear the incident. A huge fire is threatening homes at Pines Beach near Kaiapoi, north of Christchurch. Our reporter Conan Young is at Pines Beach and joins me now. Conan, what's going on there at the moment?
Look, we've got about 5 helicopters with monsoon buckets ferrying water from a nearby river over to Pines Beach. About 350 people live at Pines Beach here. The fire is extremely close to their houses and the effort is entirely focused on trying to stop that fire from reaching their homes. At the moment, unusually for this area, the wind is blowing northwest, blowing the fire away from these houses. Normally here it's easterly. It would have been blowing these flames straight into their homes. So really fortunate with the conditions here at the moment. Apart from the heat, it is stiflingly hot at the moment, pushing 30 degrees at the moment. Tinder dry conditions around me here. And I don't know if you can hear the sound of those helicopters, but they have been hard at it since just after 3 o'clock this afternoon when the call first came in that there was a fire here, and they are working to make sure this fire is under control. Just had an update actually just a minute ago from a firefighter who's in charge of, or also taking charge of this fire. He told me that, quote, the fire is roughly contained but not under control. So still a lot of work here for fire crews to do. There's 150 firefighters involved in this effort, so it just shows you just how much they're just throwing at this fire to try and get it under control.
Yeah, Conan, for those people who are listening rather than watching, I can see behind you there's a helicopter buzzing over your shoulder there, and you mentioned the fact that it's really dry. Quite long grass behind you there as well. That is brown as brown, dry, and some billowing clouds off in the distance there. If it's kind of coming close to houses, what's happened to residents?
Yeah, look, we've had 5 residents evacuated, and I've spoken to a number of other residents outside of the cordon, and they've told me that they are getting ready to evacuate just in case. There was one woman I spoke to, she was just waiting to take her daughter back. She was coming back from after school care, and she said she was going back in to try and gather some more belongings, get the cats together in case they need to make a quick exit. And there are a couple of other residents I spoke to as well in the same situation. So this woman I spoke to, she said she was a bit shocked, and really, you could tell by the looks of people's eyes, they're sort of operating on adrenaline at the moment, and trying to get through this. So pretty anxious moments here for those living really close to this fire.
Thanks, Conan. That's Conan Young, who's at Pines Beach, where there is a fire there. As you heard him say, about 5 families have been evacuated, and conditions are pretty hot and dry there. And there was a buzz of helicopters we could see in the background as well, fighting that fire. It is 7 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen, and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, coming up after 6 o'clock tonight, we'll speak to a microbiologist who wrote to the COVID response minister about his concerns over managed isolation and quarantine. Let's head to the UK now, where Britain is on the verge of recording 100,000 coronavirus deaths. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, says there are 77 known cases of the South African coronavirus variant in the UK and 9 cases of a Brazilian strain. In Wales, the number of COVID patients in hospitals recently hit record levels, but new data suggests the percentage of those testing positive could be decreasing. Here's the BBC's Hywell Griffith reporting from the Princess of Wales Hospital in Bridgend.
It's chaos on the ward, if I'm honest. It's just incredible, really, the amount of patients we're seeing coming in.
Alice Bright is an advanced respiratory nurse. The COVID patients she treats are some of the sickest, only a step away from intensive care. There are now so many of them, she's having to call on help from across the hospital.
Some of the nurses we've had to pull from other areas who are not necessarily trained in respiratory prior to the pandemic, but they've had to upskill and really step up and be able to manage these patients and look after them.
Do you have a sense that you may be hitting a new peak?
Yeah, I think we're probably at that peak more or less now, and I don't know with Christmas and everyone being able to mix on that day whether that's going to cause another peak. We'll wait and see.
The Welsh NHS is now dealing with double the number of COVID patients it treated in the first peak last year. People like Stuart Lampard, an otherwise fit and healthy 49-year-old with no underlying health conditions.
I started coughing about Christmas Day. Gradually got worse and worse and worse. They needed to turn me on the side to get some air into my lungs. I'm just a healthy man, just laying in that yellow ward, listening to a doctor have to tell somebody next to me in the bed that there's no more that he can be done for him. I was just crying on my own in bed, just thinking about that poor man next to me. Just truly, truly heartbreaking.
A few weeks ago, Bridgend had the worst COVID case rates in Wales, some of the highest in the UK. Now those numbers are feeding through onto the wards. 3/4 of the patients here have COVID-19. And the strain on the staff feels greater than at any other point in the pandemic.
It is exhausting. It's non-stop. There doesn't appear to be any relief yet, any light at the end of the tunnel.
Ruth Williams is a respiratory consultant.
It's not just physically exhausting, it is emotionally absolutely shattering some days. Some shifts that we work are horrendous shifts, and you see very, very sick people. Some of them unfortunately pass away when they're with you, others go to intensive care, and a lot of our staff are dealing with that day in, day out.
What's your sense of where you are now? Are we at the worst stage?
I hope we're at the peak. I can't imagine it getting much worse, to be perfectly honest. Second wave for us has been far, far worse than the first wave. I think, what accompanied the first wave was also the sense of the unknown and the predictions that were coming out initially, which were terrifying. But our numbers this time have been far higher. And these patients are sick, and especially on our ward, the HTU, they're young and sick, and probably younger and sicker than they were in the first wave.
More than 70 patients have already been transferred to a field hospital. The local health board has started cancelling some urgent surgery and cancer treatment. It's hard to see how the staff and the system would cope with any more demand.
And that was the BBC's Hywell Griffith. Late last year, we brought you the curious case of 80-year-old Doug Hodgetts and his missing companion, a 7-year-old Jack Russell named Tabitha. Mr Hodgetts believed his best friend was stolen on October 29 from outside a second-hand store on Munro Street in Napier. But on January 11th, 74 days after Tabitha went missing, age-concerned Napier received a phone call from a woman saying she knew where Mr Hodgetts' dog was and would return her. Our reporter Nick Trubridge has spoken to Mr Hodgetts. He says whoever had Tabitha felt pressured to return her due to mass publicity surrounding the mysterious disappearance.
I know most of the street kids in Hawke's Bay sort of thing, and they know Tabitha. So a lot of them would say, "The lady, that's Dougie's dog." So, of course, I think she panicked and said, "Oh, everybody knows now." So I got her back, and in the meantime, I got a little fox terrier given to me. But he was pulling clothes off the clothesline, biting people's heels, digging holes, everything that's bad. So when they gave me my dog back, I said, they could have that one. Yeah. Oh, I'd rather have Tabitha any day.
How did it happen, Doug? How did you get Tabitha back?
I've got a son in Hastings. He rang me up and he said that Tabitha's been found, and I had a whole lot of this free kids are coming up to me saying, "Oh, we've seen Tabitha."
And eventually this person thought, okay, everyone knows, I better give her back.
That's what I think, hey. Yeah.
What was your
Yeah.
reaction when you found out that she'd been found and that she was coming home?
I'm glad she's back, but she was grossly overweight and she, what's it, mange or something, putting the hair all over herself and everything, and she was in a state. So I've got on a special diet again, and the fur's coming back. Gee, I'm so pleased to get her back.
And that was Nick Trubich talking to Doug Hodgetts, whose Jack Russell Tabitha has been returned after 74 days missing. Yay, some good news. Let's get to some of your feedback before the news at 6 on testing, COVID testing. Someone says they waited 5 hours at Northcote for a test.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui, ko Susana Leata tēnei. The latest community COVID patient is highly likely to have caught the disease directly from a person on the same floor as her in managed isolation. Genomic testing shows the 56-year-old Northland woman has the new South African variant of the disease and that it is identical to another person staying on the same floor as her at the Pullman Hotel. Charlotte Cook reports.
The person from the facility tested positive shortly before the Northland woman left the hotel at the end of her stay. The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, says health authorities are reviewing CCTV footage and investigations are continuing to find out how the woman caught the virus. One of their theories is transmission through the ventilation system. Health officials are also considering whether to restrict the movement of guests after they've had their second and final test to prevent them from getting infected as they leave. This is Charlotte Cook.
COVID-19 community testing is being ramped up in Northland and the Auckland metro area. After reports of some people in Whangarei encountering long delays while queuing, Dr Bloomfield is calling for people to note who needs to be the priority.
There is high demand. We want the people who were at those places at the same time and date to be prioritised for testing. There are a lot of people turning up in Northland who are neither symptomatic nor were at the places. Can I ask those people to stand back and ensure that those who are the priority to be tested first?
Ashley Bloomfield says there is a list of testing centres on the Northland DHB and the Auckland Regional Public Health websites. 5 houses have been evacuated in Pines Beach north of Christchurch as 150 firefighters battle a large scrub fire. Our reporter at the scene told Checkpoint the fire is contained but not yet under control and is close to houses. 3 helicopters are also fighting the fire front, which is up to 250 metres long and has so far destroyed 2 sheds. Meanwhile, another fire at Balmoral Hill on Christchurch's Port Hills, which also threatened homes, is now under control. A heatwave sweeping southeast Australia has sent temperatures soaring in the nation's biggest cities and escalated the threat of bushfires. A large blaze has brought an emergency warning to the South Australian capital Adelaide, while neighbouring Victoria faces its worst fire risk in a year. Victoria's capital, Melbourne, reached 30 degrees Celsius by 7:30 this morning, ahead of a predicted 40 degrees Celsius. Sydney is also baking in high temperatures today. Smaller earthquakes may continue in the Bay of Plenty for weeks. This morning the bay was jolted by a series of 7 earthquakes in the space of 20 minutes. Volcanologist Brad Scott from GeoNet says these ones were slightly larger than normal, but it's not unusual for the area. However, he says this was a swarm of earthquakes where similar sized shakes follow each other rather than a typical sequence which has its largest first and then tails off. It's one of only 3 swarms in this area in the last 20 years.
If the sequence behaves like the 1998 and the 2004 sequence, there may well be earthquakes continuing for 1, 2, 3 weeks.
Brad Scott of GeoNet. Worker shortages and crop damage from the New Year deluge have left some Central Otago orchards struggling. The government has granted a border exemption for 2,000 RSE workers to help with harvest around the country, but growers say the number's not high enough because their usual overseas workers are absent. Fresh Max Orchards Central Otago Operations Manager Nigel Hope says they were preparing for a busy harvest and labour shortages when a deluge hit during the peak cherry harvest.
Some people have walked away from their crops. Some people are just struggling through, carrying on, trying to get the best that they can out of it, and basically looking forward to the next season, 2022, because this one's pretty much a write-off, really.
Nigel Hope. The National, Green and ACT parties say councils should be able to fine companies caught dumping contaminated wastewater down the drain. At least 270 firms have breached their trade waste consents in the past year, but none have been prosecuted or fined, and councils have been unsuccessfully lobbying for change for nearly 2 decades. National's local government spokesperson Christopher Luxon says it's shocking how many companies have breached their consents and they need to be held to account.
If you're a company in the 2020s, for goodness sake, anywhere operating in New Zealand or anywhere around the world, and you haven't got an integrated view of how you fit into a broader community, then you're living in the dark ages. And so, yes, there'll be some recalcitrance, and we've got to make sure we've got a system in place that actually, if you're not going to respect our laws and our rules, then we enforce them.
National MP Christopher Luxon, the Greens and ACT are also calling for a law change. It's 5 minutes past 6. A classy innings from Amy Satterthwaite has helped Canterbury hand Wellington just their second defeat of the domestic women's 2020 cricket competition. The White Ferns vice-captain hit 71 from only 50 balls to guide the Magicians to a 9-wicket win at the Basin Reserve. The win means Canterbury join Wellington in securing a spot in the top 3 finals series, and Satterthwaite says it was a good all-round team performance.
They've got a really strong batting lineup, so I think to keep them to that we were really pleased, but we also knew they've got a strong bowling attack equally, so we had to perform well and just pleased that we did.
Meanwhile, the Wellington men's team were 62 for 1 after 8 overs in their chase of 154 for victory in their match against Canterbury. Star quarterback Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers stand between the Kansas City Chiefs and a second straight title in American football Super Bowl. Led by quarterback Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City have beaten the Buffalo Bills 38-24 in today's AFC Championship game. The Chiefs will play Tampa Bay in the Super Bowl on February 7th, after Brady and the Buccaneers earlier beat the Green Packers 31-26 for the NFC title. Liverpool's slump continues with the defending English Premier League champions knocked out of football's FA Cup by arch rivals Manchester United. United have secured a 3-2 win at Old Trafford, leaving Liverpool with just 1 win from their last 7 games. In other fourth-round matches, Burnley and Everton knocked out Premier League rivals Fulham and Sheffield Wednesday, while Leicester and Chelsea also safely advanced. That's the news.
This morning on First Up, the Cook Islands travel bubble is in effect, but they're still desperate for New Zealand tourists.
Yes, I think it's great that this one-way continues at least, but certainly the return, the economy needs that financial stimulation.
And Michael Baker says the border is still our weak point as COVID-19 reappears in our community.
Given the timing, it's quite likely that she was infected in the MIQ facility.
Join me, Nathan Rariri, on First Up, weekday mornings from 5 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow for the whole North Island, fine and warm. However, cloudy morning and night in the west from Northland to Wellington with patchy light drizzle. Nelson and Bulla fine, a few areas of cloud morning and night. For Marlborough and Canterbury, mostly sunny, hot especially tomorrow. Westland, cloudy periods today, remaining showers clearing tonight, mainly fine tomorrow. Fiordland, cloudy with periods of drizzle. Otago and Southland, today cloudy in Southland with occasional light rain about Stewart Island, otherwise fine. Tomorrow, fine and warm with high cloud. And Chatham Islands, mainly fine, high cloud at times. RNZ National, it's coming up to 8 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. A microbiologist who completed a stint in managed isolation believes there's a number of weak spots in MIQ. It's been confirmed a Northland woman caught the more infectious South African strain of COVID from another returnee while they were both in managed isolation at Auckland's Pullman Hotel. But health officials don't know exactly how it was transmitted between the pair. Dr Duncan McMillan spent his 14 days in isolation in the Novotel at Auckland Airport in November, and he joins me now. Dr McMillan, were you surprised to hear that there had been a COVID transmission in managed isolation?
No, not at all, actually. I kind of expected it was a matter of time, really.
So what makes you say that?
Well, one of the things that makes me say that is because after immediately exiting the plane, I noticed that the social distancing really wasn't happening. It was getting more and more crowded as you got to the bus. There wasn't a 1.5 metre distance, and that's what you need when you have a mask. You have to have both parameters. You can't just have one. The mask is not going to help you from a close distance. And then I noticed that my room wasn't very clean at all. I had some facial hair around the bathroom, and there was a used milk carton in the fridge, and that's when I started to have a look a lot more closely at what was going on. It really wasn't my intention to go in there and do an audit, but I felt compelled to do it after seeing these fairly obvious problems, really.
So what were some of your biggest concerns? You've mentioned a couple of things there, but nurses, were they wearing proper PPE when they did tests?
Oh yeah, the nurses were doing their best. They were wearing proper PPE, but they weren't given N95 masks while I was there. And I think that if you're going to be close to people that potentially have COVID, then you're going to need to have an N95 mask on to protect both you and the people that you're testing afterwards as well.
What about mixing of guests?
Well, actually, that was the reason. The real thing that really compelled me to write a letter to the minister about it, and it was because I had just done my day 11 test, and the very next day, a new busload of people arrives. Now, these people are checked in, and they're kept separate from guests as they're checking in, and that's good, right? But immediately after that, they can then come downstairs and mix with the general population, in which case then you are mixing two populations at various stages of quarantine. And that, for me, represents a big problem, because throughout the stay there, I didn't see frequent washing of the lift buttons, and that's the immediate contact point between different people.
Because presumably the argument would be that they're supposed to stay 2 metres from you and wear their masks, even if they are in the same general area as you.
Yeah, that's a general argument, but the thing is that everybody's going to push a lift button at some point in time, and that is the contact point right there.
And
that's what you've really got to nail.
What were your observations around cleaning?
Well, as I said at the start of this interview, my room wasn't very clean, so I suspect the deep cleaning of the rooms probably doesn't happen quite to the degree that it should be. It should be more or less hospital clean if you're going to be stopping a virus like this one that's so catchy.
One of the suggestions that's been floated and is being investigated is whether people should have to stay in their rooms, like for the final 3 days or after they get their last test, not to stop any risk of mingling. Do you think that's a good idea?
To be perfectly honest, from personal point of view, I'd be more inclined to do it over the first 3 days, because that's when you're potentially most infectious. Hopefully the procedures in MIQ are such that we are controlling it to a degree that you will not get spread later on. However, since the incubation time on average is 4 to 5 days, if you actually isolated people over the first maybe 5 days or so, then did your testing right about then, the chances of them actually having it after that should be significantly reduced. So from my point of view, and this is an opinion, I would say the first days are probably more important than the last.
Right, because they've just introduced basically a new regime where you get tested on day 0 or day 1, call it what you will. You have to stay in your room until you get that result back, but that seems to be you get it within 24 or 48 hours. So you're suggesting maybe up to 5 days could be the solution. Stay in your room before you get past the worst possible infection period.
Yeah, 4 to 5 days. I mean, look, I've been through MIQ. I know that it's not an easy thing to do for anybody. And I know that, spending 4 days in your room or so is not going to be the most pleasant experience in the world. But I do wonder if this is the best way to prevent spread. And you've got a couple of tests in that period, your day 0 and your day 3. Theoretically, you're going to catch it by then, with any luck.
So you were so concerned by some of the things that you saw there that you wrote a letter to the COVID response minister, Chris Hipkins.
Yes, I did, yeah.
What's he said to you about the problems and issues that you've laid out?
So far, nothing. I haven't heard anything back. So I wrote to Chris Hipkins, and I wrote to the MIQ team about 2 weeks ago now, and it was after 1 week later that George Block contacted me, and then I said, well, you know what, I think I've actually got to tell some people about this, because of these virulent strains, you're not going to be able to stop them so easily, so therefore you really need to have some kind of oversight going on, microbiological oversight going on, and I didn't see that happening. Doesn't mean it's not happening, but I didn't actually see it happening, and I saw these little gaps in procedure, and I thought to myself, well, we've really got to do something about this if we want to stop it.
So no official response to your correspondence?
No, not as yet, no.
And, Dr Bloomfield has told us today that he's pretty confident in the system. He says it can never be 100%, but he has confidence in the system. Do you share that confidence?
Well, from what I saw in November, No. I don't know what they're doing and what changes, but they said they've implemented some changes since I went through. So maybe these new changes could be actually more outlined and more transparent to people.
Appreciate your time this evening. That's Dr Duncan McMillan, who's a microbiologist, and he did his 14 days in isolation at the Novotel Auckland Airport Hotel, and that was in November. As he said, he wrote to the Minister, hasn't heard anything back yet. This year's celebration of the Ratana faith founder has been subdued, with fewer followers making the annual pilgrimage. Today marks the 148th birthday of Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Ratana. But festivities have been scaled down this year. Mediana Johnson and cameraman Dom Thomas were there and filed this report.
The blustering winds at the Pa mirrored the conflict between factions of the church that have seen this year's annual celebrations closed to morehu or followers only. The only politicians present were Labour MPs Nanaia Mahuta and Adrian Rurafe, who's also the great-grandson of the founder of the faith, Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Ratana. The Marae Committee originally said celebrations were to be one day only, but the church executive said that decision is supposed to lie with them, resulting in no manuhiri or guests being invited to the Pa. But the conflict hasn't dampened the spirits of the hundreds of morehu who made the annual pilgrimage. Kararaina Parerohi Rahui Te Ira came for the day with her papa.
For those of us that are morehu, see, it's different for me because I'm not from the Pa here particularly. We're just one of the many morehu out there in Aotearoa. Is to just keep to the whakaaro behind the hāhi, and be pono to that.
There have been a number of wānanga over the weekend to decide the future of the church and for followers to learn about Te Ture Tangata, the political arm of the movement. Jim Turehia Edmonds Koro was a minister, or apotoro, and so he says the faith has been instilled in him. He attended a wānanga yesterday and says some things need to change.
The policies, or the kawenata, whatever you want to call it, are fine. But they need to be upgraded as we go on. That's my thoughts on it. So what we did in 2020 may not suit 2021.
Official church spokesperson Mita Ririnui says rangatahi were being educated on how the Treaty of Waitangi sits within the teachings of the church. He says that work was carried by the late Eruera Tirikatani.
He founded his scope of work fairly on the four corners of the Treaty of Waitangi, and from that time it's always been a focus for Māori members of Parliament. The current round of members are in a very strong position to continue that work. There are a number of acts of Parliament with treaty clauses in them, but there is also the bigger discussion around where the treaty sits in a written constitution.
Mr Ririnui disagrees with the call from the church executive chairman, Harirui Aperahama, for Ratana to reinstate its own political party.
We're a very large movement. We have had a long-standing relationship with the New Zealand Labour Party, and the Labour Party is now in government, and so our focus now, how do we advance that conversation around the Ratana, the morehu voice.
The main event was the whakamoimiti or church service at midday, with the band leading the procession of followers into the temple.
It's been a quieter year here at Ratana Pa, with fewer morehu coming down to the Pa for the annual pilgrimage for their leader Tahu Pōtiki Wiremu Ratana. However, that hasn't stopped these morehu from coming to celebrate, and Te Reo Te Māngai, the Ratana Brass Band, are here uplifting spirits.
The now confirmed case of COVID-19 has seen a smaller contingent from Omeka in the far north. It didn't stop Ratana band member Jacob Tobin driving down from Te Tai Tokoro last night with his son for the celebrations.
Well, any time that we can leave the far north and come and see this beautiful temepara behind me, any opportunity to come here and just be in the spirit, we'll take it. So it's very important to me, and hopefully my kids and their kids and so on just carries on.
Morehu say they're committed to living the teachings preached by their late leader. Jackie Turia was there with her whānau and says it's all about peace and love for her.
Yeah, I absolutely love the maramatanga that this place brings. And for the future, what T.W. Ratana said is to love everybody, to love the God and believe in the God, and that's what I do.
Hutu Mokopuna, Hine Ngākau and Wepeha Webster are part of the next generation of morehu. And if the recitation of their prayers is anything to go by, the faith is in good hands. I Ratana Pa, mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Mediana Johnson, DNA.
And if you were listening to Mediana's piece there, it was filmed by Dom Thomas, and we'll put that video up on our Facebook page so you can watch it there. Residents in Bay of Plenty are being warned rumbles they experienced this morning may continue for weeks. The Bay was jolted by a series of 7 earthquakes in the space of 20 minutes today. A volcanologist says it was a different style of shake and it's likely there are more to come. Jordan Bond reports.
The moment a quake struck live on TV. Rotorua councillor Meripeka Raukawa Tate being interviewed on 3's The AM Show.
The majority, by a long way, of the...
There's an earthquake going... Oh, gosh, there's an earthquake going down here.
Wow.
Ooh,
you
wow.
okay?
Sorry, Duncan, I'm fine.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Write it out.
We're still rocking and rolling here.
The first one hit at 3 minutes to 8, then the strongest 15 minutes later, a 4.9 just 5 kilometres underground. Rotorua Mayor Steve Chadwick says it was a bit of a jolt.
Enough for me to grab the bench at home and consider getting under the table. We're quite used to a bit of shaking here from time to time, but this swarm was shallow, so we really did feel it. Bit of rumbling and swaying and things being shaken about.
Kahu Walker, the principal of Edgecombe Primary School, says there was a momentary fear the shake was going to get serious.
I did at one stage, I thought, oh, here we go. This could be a go here. And then, just get that long, slow aftershake. And then I thought, oh, no. And I was kind of listening out for things, but never eventuated in the end.
Shane Lowe had just started work in Kawerau with heavy machinery.
We had a fair bit of movement on the floor of parts, big rollers and things were moving here. We've got some big overhead gantry cranes and they were swinging backwards and forwards. We had a few people looking to head for the door, that was for sure.
A volcanologist, Brad Scott from GeoNet, the earthquake information site, says this was a little bigger than normal, but shakes like this are not unusual for the Taupō volcanic zone. However, what is different is this was a swarm.
A typical earthquake is a main shock and aftershock sequence where the biggest earthquake first and then the rest of the earthquakes are smaller and just decay with time. In a swarm situation, you have sort of moderate-sized earthquakes similar to the largest earthquake recurring later in the sequence.
It's one of only 3 swarms in this area in the last 20 years.
If the sequence behaves like the 1998 and the 2004 sequence, there may well be earthquakes continuing for 1, 2, 3 weeks.
Civil Defence in the Bay of Plenty says no reports of any damage have come in. They have engineers checking out the Rotomahana Dam as a precaution, as well as the museum and the Performing Arts Centre. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jordan Bond, aho.
It is almost 22 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's only his 5th day at the White House. Joe Biden is already experiencing partisan resistance to his agenda for pandemic and economic relief. The US president has appealed for urgent cooperation between Republicans and Democrats to speed up vaccinations and cushion COVID-19's blows on businesses and families. But his plans are potentially facing the same political gridlock encountered by previous presidents. The ABC's Greg Jennett reports.
This is the first one I'm signing.
Signing off on executive orders in the White House, urging an immediate restart in his inaugural speech.
We must end this uncivil war.
Joe Biden's pre-designed the platform for his presidency. Unity and bipartisanship are its building blocks. His White House team, led by Chief of Staff Ron Klain, is hurling itself into construction.
We're going to push the Congress to pass our priorities, see what we can get done as quickly as possible.
A pandemic relief package worth more than 2.2 trillion Australian dollars is the first priority.
The plane is in a nosedive, and we got to pull it up.
Javier Becerra, Joe Biden's pick to run Health and Human Services, stresses the urgency. And there's no argument there from Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
This is a country that is in pain right now.
The Biden administration's confronted by a tricky numbers game. They have 50 votes in the Senate of 100. They'd normally need a degree of bipartisanship, at least 60 votes to pass a package of this kind. But there is a more controversial workaround by going it alone, a weapon the new Democratic Majority Leader Chuck Schumer says he's prepared to use.
There are tools we can use to move forward on our own, and we will, because the number one goal is a bold package that meets the needs of the American people.
Ramming the relief package through on their own in a process ironically known as reconciliation would bypass bipartisanship at the very first hurdle. Some Republicans still trying to adapt in a post post-Trump world do want to be at the negotiating table. Mitt Romney is one of them.
We have demonstrated a capacity to compromise. If people think, well, we don't want compromise, instead we want exactly our own proposal, why, that's a different matter.
Any atmosphere for creating goodwill isn't helped by the other looming question the Senate has to answer. Does it convict or acquit Donald Trump on the impeachment charge of inciting insurrection?
I think the president bears responsibility for some of what happened.
Florida Republican Marco Rubio doesn't absolve the former president, but wants no part in his trial.
We're going to jump right back into what we've been going through for the last 5 years. And stirring it up again with the trial, and it's just going to be bad for the country.
If he could, Senator Rubio's keen to kill the trial on the grounds they can't convict a now private citizen in Donald Trump.
Trial will start the week of February the 8th. I believe it will be a fair trial, but it will move relatively quickly.
Chuck Schumer's dismissive. The trial seems assured. A conviction, on the other hand, supported by 17 defecting Republicans, is anything but.
And that report was from the ABC's Greg Jennett. 11 gold miners have been pulled to safety in China after being trapped underground for 14 days following an explosion. But the search continues for at least 9 who are still unaccounted for. Our World Watch reporter Paulina Lau has more.
State television footage shows the first miner being brought to the surface in China's Shandong province. Rescue teams cheer as a miner wearing a black blindfold shielding his eyes from daylight is lifted out of a shaft. State broadcaster CCTV says he was extremely weak and was taken to the hospital by an ambulance. The head of the rescue team, Chen Yu-min, spoke to reporters.
The rescuers checked the miners to see if they'd any injuries and covered their eyes for protection. Generally speaking, the rescue operation proceeded faster than expected. After rescuing all the trapped miners who have been discovered, we will go on with the search for other missing miners.
Over the next few hours, 10 miners from a different section of the mine who had been getting food and medical supplies down a shaft from rescue workers were brought out in batches. Officials had said last Friday it would take another 14 days to drill through 600 metres of granite to reach the group of 10. But a ventilation shaft that had been filled with debris was cleared and the miners could be rescued in a matter of hours rather than weeks. China's mines are among some of the world's deadliest, with 573 mine-related deaths in 2020, according to the National Mine Safety Administration. The January 10th explosion trapped 22 workers underground. 1 miner is known to have died and at least 9 are still unaccounted for. For Checkpoint, Paulina Lau.
To the US now, where a fluffy cat named Lexi is back in the arms of her 10-year-old owner after being lost while on a family road trip nearly 2,000 kilometres from home. CNN's Drew Marine reports.
In July, the McMillans from the Phoenix, Arizona area took a trip to Oregon.
We decided to take the kids on an adventure.
And Lexi, a fluffy white and grey cat 10-year-old Maxine has had since she was 5, had to come with.
Because she's so shy. And so she kind of got along for the ride.
Once they got to Oregon, Lexi got away at one of their stops near Diamond Lake.
I saw her and I told him and he put her in the back, and somehow none of us, we were 5 of us, none of us saw her make her grand escape.
The McMillans extended their trip by a day to look for her, but sadly had to head back home to Arizona without Lexi.
I refused to get in the car. I wouldn't get in the car. Yeah, and it was really hard.
4 months later, an ODOT worker, Chris Southwick, found Lexi just a few miles from where the McMillans last saw her.
And it was hiding on the engine of a piece of equipment that had been used during the day to try and stay warm. We opened up the engine compartment and it was there, so I just grabbed it. There was fires, and when I found her, we had been getting a pretty good snowstorm. There's probably 2 or 3 feet at that time. I'm surprised she actually lived.
After Lexi made herself at home at Chris's house in Glide, he decided to take her to a shelter.
I just kept thinking of, my kids and how sad they would be if they had lost an animal like that.
After taking Lexi to Saving Grace Adoption Center in Roseburg, they found her owners because she was microchipped.
This is why you chip your animal.
After working out the logistics, a Saving Grace volunteer, Janice Quist, says she was happy to deliver Lexi back to Arizona. She just so happened to have a trip planned there anyway.
No big deal. It was I was determined to do it for the family.
As all of this was panning out, Lizzie and Andy, the McMillan parents, kept this a secret from their kids. After a whole 6 months apart, needless to say, Lexi's mom, Maxine, was happy to get her back home.
I was like, oh my God, is this really her? And I got so excited that I started crying.
Oh, what a delightful reunion. Let's get to some of your feedback before we go on COVID testing. The person who was saying they had to wait 5 hours at Northcote because there was only one tester operating says dozens of cars were sitting there going nowhere. Some people left, and they think it's because staff had gone north to be involved in the testing there. Another person says it was a 5-hour wait in Ruakaka. No one came along to ask details about our connection with the COVID person. We got information from our local social media source. It was really hot with little shelter, that they say, and a lot of aged people. Catch you tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Director General of Health says there is no reason at this stage to restrict travel or put Northland into lockdown because of the discovery of a community coronavirus case. Dr Ashley Bloomfield has also issued a reminder that only people showing symptoms should get themselves tested for the virus. Firefighters are tonight still battling a large scrub fire at Pines Beach north of Christchurch, where 5 houses have been